Hi, everyone. I wanted to talk about the basics of the heart and circulatory system. So, we should be learning the four objectives, including basic anatomy of the heart and the circulatory system, how the blood travels through the heart and the body, the differences between the mechanical and electrical functioning of the heart, and then we can wrap things up with, how the nervous system actually impacts the pacing of our heart. To begin, we should talk about some basic vocabulary just so we can have that foundation when we're talking about things like pulmonary artery. Um, First, anatomical position refers how we actually view 2D depictions of 3D anatomy. So I'm discussing the heart. The right side of the heart will be actually the left side of the picture, and the left side of the heart will actually be the right side of the picture, as if we're looking from that patient's point of view or that person's point of view of their own body parts. Next, we can see blood vessels in your body are divided into things called arteries and veins. In this talk, arteries are the vessels that flow away from the heart, and veins that take blood to the heart. And finally, we can see that the word pulmonary just means lungs, and that'll definitely come in handy in the next coming slides. So here we can see the heart. Its main purpose is to act as a pump to push both blood and things like oxygen within the blood throughout the body. So at first, this picture might look pretty daunting, but after some practice, we'll see how it's actually a really easy picture to decipher. So first, to simplify this heart, I liken it to a circle divided into four different parts. We see the top right and the left parts are the atria. These technically are typically smaller chambers in an actual heart. And we also see the separation from the right side of the heart and the left side of the heart, which we'll explain in more detail in the upcoming slides. These bottom two chambers are often larger and stronger, and they're called ventricles. These are the most important chambers because they do most of the work to pump the blood throughout the body. In order to keep these chambers separated, they're divided by things called valves, or these openings. I like to think of these openings as exit doors. And they're pertinent for keeping the blood flowing in a forward direction, as any backflow would cause a lot of problems. And these valves are typically named according to their shape and location. However, it's easier to actually see them in an anatomically correct picture. So we can see the four chambers here, the right atria and the left atria, the right ventricle and the left ventricles. But now we're able to see these exit doors or valves, and they're interconnecting blood vessels as well. So after oxygen in the blood gets used up from the body, it flows into the heart in the first chamber known as the right atria from these pulmonary, or not pulmonary veins, these veins. Once they're in the right atria, it can exit through our first door, also known as the tricuspid valve. Named after its three leaflets, we can imagine a standard double door, and then there's a third door at the top kind of whacking you in the head as you go through it. So now that the blood is in the right ventricle, this tricuspid valve will close. Once this occurs, the pulmonary valve opens, allowing blood to move forward and out of the pulmonary artery. And then remember what the term artery means, right? It's flowing away from the heart. And I guess where? Well, pulmonary means lungs, so you can guess that once the blood has moved from the right side of the heart, it continues away from the heart and into the lungs. But we know that blood can't just fill the lungs for the same reason that we can't breathe in fluids. The blood actually travels to areas in the lungs through small vessels, these red and blue things here, to get oxygenated from the air we actually breathe in. But how do we get the air inside the fluid without having any of the liquid flow into our actual lungs? Because remember, right, we can't breathe in fluids. Well, once we breathe in, that air travels down into our lungs and into these little balls called alveoli. And I know it's kind of a weird name, so if you have a hard time thinking of it, you can think of the word ravioli and get rid of the R. So alveoli. The special thing about these alveoli are they made up with very porous materials that allow for exchange of oxygen into the blood from these vessels and waste materials out of the blood and into those into the lungs, which might sound a little confusing, but I like to think of it as like window screens. The alveoli are like window screens, or the capillaries, the little vessels called capillaries, are like window screens. They're able to keep the flowing of the air, but they don't let anything else in, like bugs, or in this case, blood. Now that the oxygenated blood can flow back to the heart, it can be distributed across the body, right? So it's going to the heart, so it's veins. These pulmonary veins. As you can probably guess, is the pulmonary veins, or towards the heart from the lungs into the left atria. Here, another door opens called bicuspid valve, bi meaning two. It's a two-door valve, so instead of getting whacked in the head from that third one, we just have that standard double door opening. Once blood flows into that left ventricle, the bicuspid doors or valves close, and the aortic valves open. And this is the final door needed for the blood to get pushed to the rest of the body. These thick muscles of the ventricles, you can kind of see here, are the powerhouse actually contracting the walls of the heart to get enough force to push out that blood out of the aorta and into the rest of the body. From here, we can revisit the rest of the body in these small vessels. Here, we can remember the capillaries are akin to the window screens, but this time we don't need air because we already have the air within the oxygen, so alveoli don't really exist in this part. Here, oxygen leaves the red blood cells to help oxygenate the tissues of the body, and in turn, the body gives the red blood cells the waste that it doesn't want, and thus the cycle of the heart can restart. So all of that actual physical pumping and the moving of the blood is called the mechanical functioning of the heart. But how do we know when the heart should pump or how fast it should pump? Well, we can kind of understand this through the electrical component of the heart. Again, I know this looks like a lot, but I highlighted some significant areas to help you kind of remember the basics of the electrical components of the heart. Here we can see it's almost completely self-sufficient besides two parts of the nervous system, which we'll discuss in the next slide. For simplicity, the electrical activity of the heart can be kind of seen as a light switch to a light bulb. Here we have nodes, which acts as those switches for on and off, which can pace the heart. And we also have the tracts, bundles, and fibers that we can see here, which are the actual circuitry that connect that electricity to the muscles, telling them to contract. The main light switch is the sinoatrial node, and this is kind of where the electrical signals generally start from in a healthy person. And we can see within it the word atria. And you guessed it, the switch kind of tells the muscles of the atria to contract through things called Bachmann's bundle, also known as interatrial tract. So this first part tells the atrium to contract. From here, it moves down to the atrioventricular node, the key word here being ventricular. And this signals the start of the ventricles contracting. And we can see that through the atrioventricular bundle, also known as that bundle of His, was that circuitry. After it hits that light switch is the circuitry connecting those electricity to the actual muscles. And down and up here we have the Purkinje fibers, which are also linked to the ventricles. So as discussed earlier, we said that the heart is mainly self-sufficient in electrical functioning. However, we do have parts of the brain that can have some influence over this electrical process. And within the brain, these parts are considered the medulla oblongata, and the nervous system, we have the vagus nerve. These areas of the brain like to interact with physical stimulus to help regulate whether our heart needs to pump faster or slower. For instance, if we're in a haunted house and we see a guy with a chainsaw running towards us, the heart has no ability to know that we actually need that extra oxygen throughout our body or that faster pace so we can sprint away from that chainsaw. So it uses the brain to help facilitate that interaction between our sight and our heart. So in the instance of fleeing the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it uses chemicals called catecholamines to stimulate what is known as a sympathetic response. Here, catecholamine is chemical. One of them is adrenaline or epinephrine, which I'm sure you've heard about. In the sympathetic system is that flight response. Now imagine after a long day of running away from Leatherface, we need to sleep to regain our energy. To help facilitate this relaxed feeling, the brain uses chemicals called acetylcholines to help simulate a parasympathetic response, and that parasympathetic response is that relaxed response. And that's how the brain kind of interacts with the heart. And that kind of concludes our discussion, so I hope that was helpful for you.